What we do here is go back.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Mello. The Quiet on Set documentary recently aired, and it has everybody talking. Now, the documentary details SA that happened to child stars, and it's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. Now, the documentary opens up with the iconic Nickelodeon theme song. So right off the bat, we can kind of get a feel of what network they're talking about. So the documentary starts off pretty lighthearted. They paint a really pretty picture of all the hit shows that were on Nickelodeon. Now, within 2 minutes of the documentary, we get a name dropped of a man who is allegedly behind a lot of this SA. That name is Dan Schneider. Now, Dan was a producer for Nickelodeon who was responsible for a lot of hit shows. Some of those hits include All That, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Zoe 101, Victorious, and Sam and Cat, just to name a few. Now, to my surprise, this man is also behind the iconic movie Good Burger. During his time with the network, Dan was known as the Golden Boy. Now, according to the documentary, in 2017, that's when public opinion started to shift with Dan. Videos and pictures started to pick up traction online, and it not only had people side-eyeing the Golden Boy, but it raised a lot of questions as well. Now, they go on to talk about how a lot of scenes in his kids shows would reference porn. Now, I can't say the actual word, but it rhymes with that. We then see all these clips of scenes where child stars have their feet out, leading many people to believe that Dan has some sort of obsession with feet. They then go on to talk about the early career of Dan, and everything seemed pretty fine in the beginning. They describe him as this fun, loving, warm guy. Now, another thing that came as a surprise to me is just how many stars Dan was responsible for launching the career of. People like AmandaBynes, Ariana Grande, Victoria Justice, Drake and Josh, and many, many more. Now, we then get into the psychology of things. They go on to talk about how a lot of these kid stars were between the ages of 8 and 15. Being so young and being employed to where you're often the breadwinner of your family, it does cause you to put up with things that others may have not. And it may cause some parents to remain silent out of fear of losing opportunities. We then get our first real instance of something that makes you go, yeah, something's up. Now, an actor by the name of Leon played a character named Noseboy on the show All That. Well, Noseboy's costume had this big fake prosthetic nose and like 2 other big fake noses on his shoulders. That very well happened to look like 2 dicks. Now, the scene then cuts to how Noseboy is talking about he's allergic to asteroids, and then he sneezes. Well, that sneeze ended up on a young girl nearby, and the sneeze legit looked like y'all know what the hell that is. Hell, some of y'all probably had some of that last night, and I ain't judging. You know, that's okay. We all grown here. But we also get a sense of exactly what kind of ride we're on. Now, Leon goes on to talk about how, looking back, it is kind of strange of all the things they had to do. But they all sort of just chalked it up as, you know, it's just part of the job. They also realized at a young age that saying no to Dan and being on his bad side is not something that you really wanted. Leon went on to share how being on Dan's good side could result in an extra layer of success. And Dan also made it pretty clear who was and was not on his good side. We then get a few more instances of the child stars telling their stories, and then we see the coveted Miss AmandaBynes. Now, Amanda was only 10 years old when she was discovered at the Laugh Factory. Dan felt that she would be a star right away and wanted her to appear on All That. The kids then talk about how there was a shift when Amanda arrived. Now, one instance being that all the kids had to go to school on set, and when they would look up, Amanda was nowhere to be found. According to them, instead of going to school, she would be working on sketches with Dan. They then talked about how Amanda's father also had a huge role in her career as well. Now, it was stated that Dan and Amanda's father actually very carefully calculated and planned her career. Now, fast forward and Amanda gets her own show, and this was the first time that Dan was credited for creating a show. And this really helped to solidify him and Amanda's presence in the entertainment industry. We then get to hear from some of the women who were writers working for Dan. Now, they describe working for Dan as being in an abusive relationship. A little later down the line, they go on to share the story where Dan said that women can be funny. And in Dan's belief, he said that women can't write funny material. Not only that, but also the only 2 women working on the show, they had to split a salary. Now, how the hell you split a salary is beyond me. We then get a glimpse of the character Penelope Taint. Now come to find out, the taint is part of the body that's between your penis and your butthole. I was today years old when I found out what a taint was, and I was today years old when I found out I got one. Now we fast forward a bit and we come back to one of the writers talking about their experience. And they went on to say how Dan would sometimes watch porn in front of them and also ask for massages. Now I've said it before and I'm gonna say it again. At what point does accountability and integrity come in? I don't know about y'all, but I don't give a damn who it is. If my boss is watching porn and they're asking me to physically touch them, I'm just not gonna do it. But because these women had zero integrity and no morals, they ultimately put up with the stuff that Dan put them through. And I mean, this is kind of evident by the two of them splitting the salary. I firmly believe when you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. And because these two women stood for nothing, they fell for everything. At some point as an adult, you have to take accountability for your part. And one of the funny things that I'm coming to learn about power is that it's only as powerful as you make it to be. Imagine those ladies saying, no, I'm not finna split my salary. Imagine them standing up and saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with you watching porn when I'm around or asking me to give you massages. Now, granted, they probably would have been sent home and not gotten that particular job, but Dan would have had zero power over them. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that both of these women writers, they were adults at the time. Now look, I'll be the bad guy and I'll take one for the team this time. With these two women in particular, the mistreatment got as bad as it did because they simply allowed it to. People do to you what you allow them to. Always remember that. We then get to the part where somewhere down the line, the two women writers found out that splitting their salary is illegal. Dan then reached out to them and threatened one of their careers. You know, all of a sudden, Dan found out the Writers Guild was on his back, and that's where we saw a shift with him. They go on to describe Dan as you can sort of feel his presence when he's on set. And he will go on and switch from nice to mean, from mean to nice. Now, the first episode comes to an end describing what happened to the two women writers. Now, one got fired because allegedly Dan thought that he owned all their time. You know, one weekend, I guess she went to a concert, and at another time, she had some friends over her house. The other writer also described how she went on to leave the network. Now, according to her, one day Dan asked all the men into his office but left her out. He then sometime later called her into the office and asked her to pitch her idea. Now, she pitched it, and while she was doing so, all of a sudden Dan asked her, like, didn't you used to be a phone sex operator? She said no, and he insisted that she did, and again, she told him that she didn't. Well, that was enough to make her leave the room crying, and that day she ended up quitting. Now, that was just all episode 1, and I hope that you hoes is still up and awake because we're about to get into part 2. Part 2 starts off with old Hollywood. They take us back in time and we get the glitz and the glam and the cameras flashing. And then it cuts to a woman by the name of MJ. Now, MJ is the mother of a young girl named Brandy. Now, MJ goes on to describe how parents weren't allowed back on the set. Instead, they were usually greeted by a production assistant by the name of Jason Handy. Now, the mother goes on to describe Jason and shares all these great qualities about him that sort of just made you want to be his friend. She talked about how when he wasn't on set, he would come out and often talk to all the mothers. She then went on to talk about how Jason started to exchange his email and phone number with parents and kids from the TV show. So about a week later, her daughter Brandy receives her first email from Jason. The email was just talking about shows that he's worked on, nothing inappropriate as described by the mother. She then tells the story of how one day her daughter was at the computer and just all of a sudden she shut it down, ran upstairs, and closed her door shut. Now, the mother goes on to say that the daughter described that she received an email from Jason where he was naked and was practically pretty much stroking his stuff. Now, the daughter said that Jason sent it because he wanted to show her how much he was thinking about her. The mother said that she struggled and went back and forth with, should I call the police, should I not? But ultimately, she didn't want to look like a bad mother for allowing her child to talk to Jason. After that, MJ said her daughter left the industry and never went back. We then see the coming of age of AmandaBynes, and they briefly walk us through her career. Now, around the age of 16, Amanda stated that she wanted to do more mature roles. That's when the show What I Like About You came into fruition. They then stated that Dan pretty much thought he was the one who thought that he should usher Amanda into womanhood. Fast forward, Amanda's having problems at home and she ends up running away, to which she then turned to Dan for help. Now, they say the details become murky, but they do know that the police were involved. Amanda's parents then become really upset with Dan, and understandably so. after that, a plan pretty much emerged to have Amanda emancipated and take her away from her parents. According to the documentary, this plan takes Amanda's parents completely by surprise. The emancipation ends up going to court and it fails. It then creates a huge rift between Dan and Amanda's parents, and this is the part where things start to fall apart. Not too long after that, Dan ends up leaving the show What I Like About You. He then returns to Nickelodeon and revamps all that. We fast forward a bit and we pick up with other child stars like Giovanni. They then share a few stories about their experience, and then we get one mom in particular by the name of Tracy. Now, behind the scenes, Tracy was made out to be the problem. She and her son talked about how oftentimes the sketches he had to do, they were often stereotyped, such as him having to play a rapper or what some people could presume as a drug dealer. Okay, so remember how we were talking about Jason in the beginning of part 2? Well, fast forward and Jason is arrested to doing inappropriate things with children. According to the documentary, in 2003, law enforcement were tipped off and they conducted a search inside of Jason's home. They then found an entire collection of porn. Now, we're talking about over 10,000 images of children. Not only that, but they also found plastic bags with girls' name on it with some sort of token inside. Some of these plastic bags even had young girls' underwear in them. They also found a journal where Jason described in great detail just how he felt about these young girls. Now, somewhere in the journal, he also admitted to being a full-blown P-word. We then hear about how 2 families went to court in order to testify against Jason. A story is told about one girl who was only 9 at the time and Jason was over her house. During that time, Jason ended up alone with her in her bedroom where he kissed her several times. During that time, he also told her that he can get her onto other TV shows. Now, after everything was said and done, Jason was only sentenced to 6 years in prison. MJ, who's the mother of Brandy, she goes on to talk about how everything was pretty much swept under the rug. You know, the mentality was very much, the show must go on. So Jason was arrested in April of 2003. 4 months later, a man by the name of Brian Peck will be arrested as well for doing the same thing. Now, Brian worked at Nickelodeon as a producer, I believe. Now, some of you all may recognize him for his small appearances as Pickle Boy. Now, get into this shit. We fast forward a bit and they're talking about how Brian wants to do a party at his house. Now, he had this one particular room where it was designed to be more like a shrine for Planet of the Apes. Well, somewhere in the corner there was a painting that stood out to a child at the time. Now, he said it stood out to him because it had nothing to do with apes. Now, he goes on to describe this painting as a clown holding balloons. He goes on to say how excited he remembers Brian got when he asked him about this picture. He then flipped the picture around and on the back of it, this is what it says. To Brian, I hope you enjoy the painting. Best wishes, your friend, John Wayne Gacy. Now, for those of you who don't know, John Wayne Gacy was an American serial offer and SO who R-word, T-word, and M-word at least 33 young men and boys in Norwood Park Township near Chicago. It goes on to say he became known as the Killer Clown due to his public performances as a clown prior to the discovery of his crimes. Come to find out, Brian also had this pen pal system with Gacy. Now, we fast forward a bit and the child stars go on to talk about how they were told that Brian would not be returning to the show. They go on to say that he was arrested for charges that were related to doing things to a child working there at the time. Now, the suspense builds and we cut to the myth, the legend himself, DrakeBell. Thus, concluding part 1 and part 2 of Quiet on Set.
Lord, I'm having a heart attack. Damn, this is some scary shit. Oh, I am scared.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to go ahead and give it a thumbs up or thumbs down if that's okay too. Don't forget to drop a comment down below. Now, what do you think about this crazy documentary? Have you had the chance to catch it? Now, I'm curious to know, if you had a child who wanted to be a child actor, would you let them go into the industry? And as always, if you're not already, please make sure to go ahead and subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit that post notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, y'all. Look, hide your kids, hide your wife, and I'll catch you all on the next one.